Well, welcome back to part two of our series. Today's topic is conscious business, and we're going to dive into what it means to lead a business that prioritizes purpose and sustainability alongside profit. Of course, you're in business for profit. This is something that has shaped our careers, and I'm excited to get into this with Caroline and Jennifer. So, Jen, perhaps you can give us your thoughts. I know you talk about a lot of trust with respect to conscious business. So let's start you off with
Sure.
trust.
So for me, I think, being conscious as a leader, it really is intentionality. And so with anything in life, right, it's about building relationships with people. And certainly as a leader of teams, for example, you have to build that connection with them or just people you're working with across different businesses or organizations, whether you're an entrepreneur or you're working for another company. Connection and that trust and relationship are the key, to me. That's the foundation of anything, right? And so it's, as I reflect on what that means in the day to day, it is really about um, connecting with people on a daily basis. It's about
Mhm.
getting to know them as people, caring about them as people more than just the work they do or what they can give you, because that authenticity comes through over time. And that's really how you build that relationship and the trust. And that's so powerful to any business. Again, whether you're an entrepreneur or not, you need other people to help you do whatever it is you do.
Yeah.
And so you have to build that trust, and it only comes through that intentionality and recognizing that people are more valuable than projects and work, right? And spending time with them on a daily basis. And it can be super simple. It can be, greeting them, just checking in. How are they doing through the day? Those little deposits show to people that you see them and that you value them and you're interested in them. And again, it's such a critical part of that human connection. But when you do whatever it is that you do, hopefully the motivating factor is to make a positive impact on someone else's life. That is certainly, I know for all of us, has been a real driving force for us in both our corporate and entrepreneur lives. Um, but I think each of us individually desire to have people see us and value us and hear us. And the
Mm.
first way and the easiest way, in my opinion, that you can help people realize that is just by connecting with them. And over time, that's what builds that trust and belief in you as a person.
So is there an example of like trust in action that you
Yeah,
can think of?
so I think a simple, example would be, just as being vulnerable with people and being honest about your own experiences. So I'll give a context of leaders and teams, just because this is my audience. This is who I focus on and support. Um,
Mm.
I think sometimes leaders are hesitant to give feedback to their team members because they're unsure how they're going to respond and what should they say, and they don't want to create a bad experience for their team member. But when a leader, as they're sharing feedback with a team member, if there's something about that situation that has happened in their own life and their own experience, and they can relate to that person and say, you know what, I know this might be difficult. I actually had this same situation happen to me. And here's what happened, and here's how I, worked through it, or here's what I learned. That vulnerability with somebody, you make lots of deposits in the trust factor and the trust account with that person,
Mm.
because you're not only relating to that person and helping them realize they're not alone, they're not the only person who's experienced whatever this thing is, but you're also giving them hope, because they
Mhm.
can see that, okay, there is a way through this. Maybe I didn't handle this situation really well, but it's not the end of the world, right? I can move through this. I can learn. I have a leader here who's going to support me in that journey, right? But it also says to that person, hey, my leader trusts me because
Right.
they were willing to share this with me. And so to me, that is trust in action, right? You
Beautiful.
can't you can't make people trust you. It's not an instantaneous thing. Again, it kind of goes
Mhm.
back to my first comment. To me, conscious leadership is being intentional. It is an intentional action.
Mm.
And over time, that's what builds your trust and connection.
Very well said.
Mm-hmm.
So
Caroline.
Caroline, what about you? When you think about conscious leadership, what does that, evoke in your mind in the day to day?
Everything that you just said speaks to a lot of what I try to teach when I'm working with people, and that's about preserving the dignity of others. And really, that authenticity, the vulnerability, the being willing to apologize, for example. And just in thinking of an experience I had with my very first job out of college, and it was in a law firm, and I was a runner, intern, very bottom of the hierarchy, and was in an attorney's office with him and his assistant, and they had a great relationship and had worked together for years, and they were having a conversation, and I, as the outsider, could see that there's a major disconnect here.
Oh,
I understand what she's saying, I understand what he's asking, and it's not hitting. They're not meeting in their communication, and which is, well, I'll go to that later. But he got frustrated, allowed his frustration to further cloud his ability to listen to her, and then he just blasted her,
oh,
just eviscerated her. And she left in tears. And little lowly intern is standing there with eyes wide open, and he turned around and he said, "What do you have to say about the situation?" And I thought, oh. And I said, "Well, this is what she was saying, and this is how you were hearing it, which is not what she meant." And I went through this whole interpretation, and it totally took the wind out of his sails. And he realized that he had been in the wrong to just blast her, went, apologized, restored dignity, her dignity to her, restored dignity to the situation, and they ironed out their communication with each other. And it took that moment of vulnerability for him. Once I had very timidly explained what I saw going on, that I was wrong. I should have waited. I should have calmed down. I should have listened. And he went and sort of laid all that out, all that vulnerability, and apologized and asked for forgiveness, and which was for her a little awkward too, because she wasn't used to that in the dynamic of their relationship. And while it had always been a strong relationship, that was new. And so having that moment to apologize, to forgive, to restore the authenticity and the trust in that relationship was huge. And it was such a lesson for me to stop and listen. If I feel that frustration bubbling up, take a step back. Say, I'm not, my head is not in a good place to hear this. We need to pause if necessary. And it boils down to communication and communicating that vulnerability, stopping and listening, because so often when we think of communication, we think of, this talking, and pausing to listen to what's really being said and what's really happening. And then to your point from our previous episode, stopping and acting on it, as opposed to thinking about it, worrying about it, second guessing it, acting on that authenticity, putting yourself out there and saying, this is who I am, this is my mistake, this is how we need to proceed further, and ultimately preserving dignity.
Yeah, I love that.
you sure it
And it
wasn't
takes a
you
lot of
walked into my office talking to an intern? You sure?
Say again? I didn't hear you.
It wasn't me you walked into when I was in that
No,
in
it wasn't you. No.
that's who I was maybe
This
25
was,
years
I
ago.
mean, this was in the 90s. I'll admit that much. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, I was in the 90s. I was called a Terminator. I was bad.
wow.
You've clearly evolved then, Raju.
Oh my God. I would hope that people who are still listening, maybe part of that ilk, do forgive me. I'm asking for forgiveness. Oh my God.
But it takes a lot of courage, I think, to lead in that way, or even
Mhm.
to be open and receptive to someone's feedback. It's as individuals, it's not only about us giving feedback; it's receiving it. And I think that example you gave, Caroline, is so great, because that leader that wasn't, obviously didn't handle the situation really well to start with. He was courageous enough to ask the question, and you had a
Mhm.
lot of courage to answer with what you felt was true, right?
I
Because
was terrified not to answer.
you were, right? And I think a lot of times when we give feedback to people, especially if it's not real positive, like,
Yeah.
you probably could have handled this a little bit better. And we've all had those situations. Nobody's perfect, right? And that's what I always try to remind the leaders that I coach. You're not the only person who's ever experienced this, and you don't have to be perfect. You're not going to have all the answers. You're still human and learning too. But I do think it takes a lot of courage to ask for the feedback and then to receive it and do something positive with it. Because again, that it kind of goes back to my original thought. That's what connects people. It's the communication, but it is that trust. And people realizing, we're all human, so it's an important quality of being courageous in that. So Raju,
we're double teaming you now.
Okay.
What's it mean to you?
Well, when I talk about conscious business, I really am referring to the and I talk about this in my book as well, but the levels of consciousness. Three types: that your life is happening to you, or life is happening by you. You're in charge of life. The first one's about being a victim. Second one is I'm in charge, and we have all these in us, by the way. And the third is like life is happening through us. So when we get into this highly stressful situation, we think life is happening to us, and we blame something else outside of us. So getting over this is when you're establishing a business or think about what you're going to do. Really, it's about knowing that you're going to be congruent, authentic, fully aware, intentional, as you said, Jen. It's if you're not going to intend something uplifting and positive, you're already off on the wrong foot. Because if the idea is to gouge people with pricing, or if the idea is to, take something rather than give something, in our previous episode we talk about serving, before you sell. It's all of those things, because and trust and collaboration, and you guys just talked about it. I mean, to me, for example, just to talk about trust for a second, for me, trust is meaning what you say and then following through with what you said you will do. And that's my biggest lesson in life. And I am known for this. And this was even when I was a Terminator. When I say I will do something, you better believe it, I will do it. If I'm going to invite you to dinner, I'm going to say, it's not like one of those passing, hey, let's do lunch, and then forget about it, years go by. No, I will do lunch. Or I won't say it. So if it comes out of my mouth, it's a promise, it's going to be delivered. So this is how I build trust. And I think I respect people who say that as well. So consciousness is another part of it, because it's about fully intentional, fully aware, where it's coming from. And that's also what builds your karma or otherwise, because if you intend something and then it's in conflict with you and it's not congruent with you, you will take the wrong step and take shortcuts.
Raju, do you think too, when something is not in step with who you are and your authenticity and all, you can get a gut check on that too. It can be with a business decision that you do it, and it's almost it's a feeling that I've done something wrong here. This is not the right course of action. You start second guessing and worrying. You can feel it when you've taken that wrong step, physically almost.
Absolutely. I mean, another thing I have in chapter 4 of my book or something, it's that, because you have your behavior and your actions are driven by these 6 mental faculties, I call them, or well known about this is it's your free will is at work, your imagination's at work, your memory is at work, your perceptions and logic are always at work, and then the one thing that's at work but you don't recognize it is your intuition, to your point. So your intuition is your strongest, but it takes a lot of work to develop intuition. And if you did something wrong, if it wasn't intentional, I think anyone will forgive you. But if you recognize that you're about to make a wrong decision and your gut's telling you that, then you better pay attention. So it's sharpening. I'd say the only way to sharpen your intuition is to be silent with yourself at least 2 or 3 times a day. And I mean, even if it's 2 minutes, because that's when your silence is loud and you can actually hear it, and your gut reaction, your gut feelings and your intuition will be that much stronger if you practice.
I think you have to pay attention. Those red flags are there for a reason.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. But and unfortunately, I do think that sometimes we can make decisions that we feel like, okay, this is what is expected, right, in the work world, right? But my hope is that people will feel more confident and courageous, to your point, Caroline, earlier, like to speak what's really, what's really on their mind, because you can say things, even if it's maybe not in line with everybody else, right? You're picking up on something that maybe other people are not. And that's really valuable.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I think sometimes, in the work world, sometimes you can have those feelings, particularly if you're young in your journey, your career journey, right? You may feel like, well, I can't really say. So that's why I think your example is so beautiful, Caroline, because you were so young in your career and you had the courage to speak up and say, this is really what I saw happening. Whereas I think sometimes people are more shy about that. And so it does, again, it kind of comes back to being authentic to who you are. And again, if your intent is coming from a place of like, I just want to help bring awareness to this, or what if we looked at this problem this way? Maybe we could solve it a little differently. There's a lot of value that people bring. And so I always, try to, help people like be who you are, be
Yeah.
authentic to what you believe is, true and important in that situation, because it may just be exactly what that audience or that other person needs from you.
In framing that kind of feedback, Jennifer, wouldn't you're looking at the behaviors, the actions, the consequences, and not that personal, like, well, you were wrong, or you did something bad,
Yeah.
or that was not right. Looking at the choices you make, the actions you take. I mean, do you think that's the way to go about it too?
Yeah, for sure. I think you have to ask, what was going on when you made that decision, or what prompted you to respond that way? Like, because I do think, you hear that phrase, there's always two sides to every story. There's always more to what you see. You're
Yes.
not going to
Yeah.
see everything. You're not going to get the whole story by just that one experience. There's something else, like in that example you gave, Caroline, there was something else that was causing that leader to get so frustrated with the situation and to kind of manifest it in the way he communicated, right? So I think, with feedback, I think you have to take it from a position of, start with, hey, this situation happened, or this email was sent, right? Whatever the case is, help me understand what was going on. Tell me a little bit of the backstory here,
Mm-hmm.
because then you're not coming in accusing somebody, because that'll shut them down immediately, right? And
Right.
again, if you're trying to build authentic relationship and that connection and trust, you've got to come in from the perspective of, hey, I don't have all the answers. I don't know all the reasons this happened. So I need to give my person an opportunity to explain, or the other person on the other side, an opportunity to explain what was going on. Because from there, you typically find pieces. Oh, okay. Then you kind of calm down, because you might be really frustrated with the situation. But
Right.
it'll kind of also help bring you down a little bit and calm you down to realize, hey, this person's human. They had a bad day and it just kind of manifested it, or it manifested in this way, or maybe there's something else that's really, creating this wedge in this relationship with these other people, what have you. So I think you have to start there and try to get as many facts as you can and talk through it, because then it feels like you're doing this together. And you start to, when you come in from that perspective, like you're interested in what that person has to say, again, that intentionality of care. I see you, I hear you, I'm interested in what you have to say. Your person, or that person you're giving feedback to, will be much more receptive, and they'll
Mm-hmm.
listen to you and hear you. Again, the example you gave is such a beautiful one, Caroline, because it demonstrated that in action, right? The person asked, well, like, what's your perspective on it, right? And you said, well, hey, this is what I see, this is what
Yeah.
I think they meant. And it kind of helped that person kind of calm down and realize, I really misinterpreted that situation and I should have done
Yeah.
that better. And that's
Mm-hmm.
what you want people to realize, if in fact they maybe could have taken a different path.
I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So, Caroline, based on what you talked about in terms of the consciousness aspect, if there's people listening and wanting to make that jump, because that's the kind of audience that mine is, and yours is similar, in wanting to be an authentic entrepreneur, what would you leave them with as parting words about this topic? Think about.
I think for me, taking that pause, and you've talked about this a lot, Raju, about the mindfulness and really pausing to assess a situation or a conversation or that email before you act, and then acting. But really being intentional about it, giving it some thought, being aware of what the rest of the story might be, before you respond angrily to a question or a comment, that you take that moment. And in business, things can get so fast paced, but I'm not asking you to sit back and ponder for several hours, but just that pause to really, the old adage of counting to 10 before you speak in anger, for example, it really gives you a chance to, okay, before I have this knee-jerk response, let's assess the situation. Let's understand where the other person is coming from. How do we preserve the dignity of everyone involved with the situation before we jump into actions and words? So just that little bit of thought before you.
Beautiful. I still need to learn this.
Oh, I do too.
Well,
Work in progress.
we all are human.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, Jen, what about you? Some parting thoughts on this?
I think it comes down to just that intentionality and thoughtfulness, and realizing that there are more sides to the story than you know.
Yep.
I think that has been such a guiding principle for me, particularly as a leader, as a coach, is helping people realize, it's more than what you see on the surface. There's more happening there. And I think it's, how you build trust and connection with people. It is about thoughtfulness. It is about intentionality and realizing that the best way to cultivate that with other people is to hear them out and to listen. To your point earlier, Caroline, it really is about listening, not always talking.
And you're so good at it, Jen. Every time I reach out to Jen, she's thoughtful. I'm sort of reactive sometimes, but boy, she centers me.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree with that, Raju.
All right. So
how about you? What are you going to leave us with?
I just think that, to me, trust is super important. I think that you guys have talked so much about it. Conscious business for me is primarily about congruence between who you internally are and what you portray. And if you're, it's also self-regulating. In other words, if you are acting out differently than what you feel inside, it's always going to be conflict. It's always going to show up in some pain in your body or something, or in business, because if you're not authentic and congruent. So I talk a lot about alignment and congruent, because if we're not coming from the heart, then we've lost something. So, as you think about jumping your job or whatever to take the plunge in business, just know that authenticity, balancing profit with purpose, creating an environment where there is thriving through trust and other ways that it all sounds like motherhood and apple pie, but truth is that's what it is.
Yeah.
If you're not going to live it, then it's not going to be helpful to anybody.
Yeah, and it does impact all the areas of your life, whether you're in business or you step out on your own business, right? It absolutely impacts all the elements of your business success. Doesn't matter if you're in corporate or you're doing your own business. You have to be authentic.
So just remember, we're always at cause, and we're creating a ripple effect, positive or negative. So you're putting it out there, it's going to impact somebody. So yeah, that's my only message from my perspective.
I think it's a good one.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for joining us today. In our final episode, we'll be talking about the life of an entrepreneur. I'm sure you want to know about that, and we have some juicy bits about that too. So until then, take care and keep leading with purpose. Thank you, Caroline, Jen.
Thanks, Raju.